December 13th, 1945, Hamelin Prison. At exactly 9:34 in the morning, a 26-year-old woman was led into the execution room. Her name was Elisabeth Volkenrath. Just a few years earlier, she had been a hairdresser from a quiet German town. An ordinary young woman with an ordinary life. But by the end of the war, survivors knew her as something else entirely. One of the most feared female guards of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Witnesses said she beat prisoners without mercy. They said she sent starving women into punishment cells, and they said she stood at the selections helping decide who would live and who would disappear forever. When she finally faced a British military court, Volkenrath denied almost everything. But the women who survived her did not stay silent. Their testimonies destroyed her defense, exposed her cruelty, and sealed her fate. This is the story of Elisabeth Volkenrath, the hairdresser who entered the Nazi camp system, rose through its ranks, and became one of the most hated women of Bergen-Belsen. Before the world knew her as Elisabeth Volkenrath, she was Elisabeth Mühlern. She was born in 1919 in Schönau an der Katzbach, a German town that is now part of Poland. There was nothing remarkable about her beginning. No sign of the cruelty that would later make survivors remember her name with fear. She came from a working-class background. Like many young women of her generation, her dreams were simple: a job, a home, a quiet life. After leaving school, she trained as a hairdresser and found work in a local salon. To anyone who saw her then, she may have looked ordinary. A young woman with friends, a young woman with a trade, a young woman who still had the chance to live a normal life. But Germany was changing. And as the Nazi regime tightened its grip, ordinary people were being pulled into something much darker. For Elisabeth, that path would lead far away from the salon chair and into the barbed wire world of the concentration camps. But in the late 1930s, as the Nazi Party tightened its grip on Germany, a radical transformation was underway. A powerful ideology was seeping into every corner of society. It promised national pride and a glorious future while systematically dehumanizing anyone it labeled an enemy of the state. For many, the chance to be part of this national project was too strong to resist. New opportunities arose, especially for those willing to embrace the regime's brutal vision. For a young woman like Elisabeth, the path forward wasn't necessarily born of die-hard belief, but perhaps of perceived opportunity. In 1938, she moved to Berlin to work in another salon, but the world was on the brink of a war that would change her life, and millions of others, forever. When the war began in 1939, the demand for labor in Germany's war machine and its vast network of camps skyrocketed. It was an invitation that would lead Elisabeth down a path of no return. In 1941, Elisabeth Volkenrath, no longer a hairdresser, made a choice that would seal her dark legacy in history. She volunteered for service as an Aufseherin, a female guard in the Nazi concentration camp system. It's a decision that's hard to wrap your head around today. Was she a fervent believer in Nazi ideology? Did she crave the authority she couldn't find in civilian life? Or was it just a practical choice for a stable job with a uniform and a sense of purpose? We may never know her exact motivations, but we know the consequences of her choice all too well. Her first post was at Ravensbrück, the notorious concentration camp for women north of Berlin. Ravensbrück was the main training ground for female SS guards. It was here that women from all walks of life, nurses, factory workers, and hairdressers like Volkenrath, were systematically indoctrinated and desensitized. They were taught to see prisoners not as people, but as subhuman enemies of the state, identified only by a number on their arm and a colored triangle on their striped uniform. The curriculum was brutality, the lessons were in cruelty, any lingering empathy was stamped out and replaced with cold superiority and unquestioning obedience. Volkenrath proved to be an excellent student. She absorbed the lessons of Ravensbrück and learned to wield power with an iron fist. Her transformation there prepared her for her next and most infamous assignment. As Oberaufseherin of Auschwitz, Elisabeth Volkenrath's authority was absolute, and her cruelty knew no bounds. Survivor testimonies from her post-war trial paint a chilling, consistent picture of a woman who seemed to revel in her power to inflict pain. She wasn't some distant administrator signing papers. She was a hands-on tormentor, a constant, menacing presence. Her favorite tool of enforcement was a rubber truncheon, a weapon she used with terrifying frequency. Witness after witness described Volkenrath's explosive, unpredictable violence. One of the most damning accounts came from a survivor named Vera Fischer, who described in an affidavit how Volkenrath, without provocation, would single out prisoners for beatings. She recounted Volkenrath confronting her and beating her mercilessly with the truncheon until she lost consciousness. She woke up in the camp infirmary, where she stayed for 3 agonizing weeks. This wasn't a one-time thing. Court records from the Belsen trial detailed dozens of such beatings where she struck prisoners until they were unconscious or dead. Her violence wasn't for discipline, it was for sport. As Oberaufseherin of Auschwitz, Elisabeth Volkenrath's authority was absolute, and her cruelty knew no bounds. Survivor testimonies from her post-war trial paint a chilling, consistent picture of a woman who seemed to revel in her power to inflict pain. She wasn't some distant administrator signing papers. She was a hands-on tormentor, a constant, menacing presence. Her favorite tool of enforcement was a rubber truncheon, a weapon she used with terrifying frequency. Witness after witness described Volkenrath's explosive, unpredictable violence. One of the most damning accounts came from a survivor named Vera Fischer, who described in an affidavit how Volkenrath, without provocation, would single out prisoners for beatings. She recounted Volkenrath confronting her and beating her mercilessly with the truncheon until she lost consciousness. She woke up in the camp infirmary, where she stayed for 3 agonizing weeks. This wasn't a one-time thing. Court records from the Belsen trial detailed dozens of such beatings where she struck prisoners until they were unconscious or dead. Her violence wasn't for discipline, it was for sport. Another survivor, Helene Herkovitz, gave a harrowing account of being beaten and then sentenced by Volkenrath to the camp's standing cells, cramped, dark spaces where prisoners were forced to stand for days without food or water, left to starve in the darkness. Perhaps one of the most infamous stories of her brutality, repeated by multiple witnesses, involved an elderly woman. The woman, frail from starvation, was struggling to climb a flight of stairs. For reasons known only to her, Volkenrath became enraged at the woman's slow pace. Instead of ignoring her, Volkenrath walked up behind her and with a single violent shove pushed her from the top of the stairs. The woman tumbled down the hard steps, her body breaking on impact. She died at the bottom. This act, so pointless and full of malice, became a defining image of Volkenrath's character. Beyond these individual acts, Volkenrath played a direct role in the machinery of mass extermination. As Oberaufseherin, she was a key participant in the dreaded selections. These were the moments when new transports of prisoners arrived or when the camp population was culled. Standing on the ramp alongside SS doctors, Volkenrath would help decide who was fit for slave labor and who would be sent directly to the gas chambers. With a flick of her wrist, she condemned thousands to immediate death. She'd walk through the barracks, her gaze sweeping over the emaciated women, pointing out anyone who looked too sick or weak to work. During her trial, she would deny all of this, claiming she was never present for selections. But the testimony of numerous survivors directly contradicted her, placing her at the scene as an active and willing participant in mass murder. As the Red Army pushed west in late 1944, the Nazi regime began emptying its camps in occupied Poland, desperate to hide the evidence of its crimes. Prisoners were forced onto brutal marches, records were destroyed, and the machinery of terror began retreating into Germany. Elisabeth Volkenrath was part of that movement. In the final weeks before Auschwitz was liberated, she was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp in northern Germany. For the prisoners sent there, it may have sounded like escape, but it was only another nightmare. Bergen-Belsen did not have gas chambers like Auschwitz, but death was everywhere. By then, the camp had become a dumping ground for prisoners evacuated from other camps. It was overcrowded, starving, filthy, and overwhelmed by disease. Typhus spread through the barracks, food was almost gone, and bodies lay unburied across the camp. Into this dying world came Elisabeth Volkenrath. She did not bring mercy, she brought the brutality of Auschwitz with her. At Bergen-Belsen, Volkenrath was again placed in a position of authority, and survivors said her cruelty did not change. Even as the Third Reich was collapsing around her, she continued to rule through fear. Prisoners remembered her beatings, her threats, and the same cold violence she had shown at Auschwitz. The camp was already filled with starvation, sickness, and death, but Volkenrath added another layer of terror for the women trapped under her control. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945, they found a scene almost impossible to comprehend. Thousands of bodies lay across the camp, while the living were weak, sick, and barely surviving. The captured SS guards, including Volkenrath, were forced to help bury the dead. But survivors later testified that even then, under British watch, she still showed cruelty toward prisoners working nearby. It was one final sign of who she had become, a woman who had built her power on suffering and showed no real remorse when that power was finally taken away. The liberation of Bergen-Belsen did more than expose the horror of the camp. It opened the door to justice. The British soldiers who entered Belsen had seen the bodies, the starvation, the disease, and the survivors who could barely speak. Now the question was no longer just what had happened there. The question was, who would answer for it? In the autumn of 1945, a British military tribunal was held in a gymnasium in Lüneburg, Germany. It became known as the Belsen trial, one of the first major war crimes trials after the defeat of Nazi Germany. 45 former SS personnel and camp officials from Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz were placed before the court. Among them was Elisabeth Volkenrath, listed as accused number 7. The case against Volkenrath was built on the voices of the women who had survived her. One by one, they stood before the court and described what they had seen. They spoke of beatings, they spoke of punishment, they spoke of fear that followed her through the barracks. The court heard from survivors who said Volkenrath had attacked prisoners, sent women to harsh punishment, and treated starving people with open cruelty. Witnesses also accused her of taking part in the selections at Auschwitz, the moments when prisoners were separated between forced labor and death. Volkenrath denied it. But the testimonies kept coming, and together they painted the same picture. This was not a powerless woman trapped inside the system. This was a guard who had used her authority with violence, and who survivors remembered as one of the most feared women in the camps. When it was her turn to take the stand, Elisabeth Volkenrath pleaded not guilty. Her testimony was a masterclass in denial. She tried to portray herself as a low-level functionary simply doing her job. In a stunning attempt to gain sympathy, she claimed the conditions were harsh for the guards too, stating, "It was really terrible in the camps, but it was also terrible for us. We were punished just like the prisoners." When confronted with dozens of accounts of her beating prisoners, she flatly denied them, admitting only to occasionally slapping a prisoner's face. She claimed she didn't know prisoners by name, only by their numbers, a chilling admission of the very dehumanization she practiced. Regarding the selections at Auschwitz, she was adamant. She was never there, she never participated. She dismissed the consistent, detailed accounts from numerous survivors as a coordinated campaign of lies. "It's all lies," she repeated, but her defense crumbled under the sheer weight of the evidence. Her cold demeanor and lack of remorse did nothing to help her. On November 17, 1945, the tribunal found Elisabeth Volkenrath guilty on both counts for her crimes at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. The sentence followed swiftly, death by hanging. The execution of the Belsen convicts was scheduled for December 13, 1945, at Hamon prison. The man tasked with the sentence was Britain's most experienced executioner, Albert Pierrepoint. Pierrepoint was a professional who viewed his work as a technical craft. His primary concern was efficiency and ensuring death was as swift as possible. To do this, he used the long drop method of hanging, a scientific technique designed to break the neck instantly, causing immediate and painless death. The key was precision. The length of the drop had to be perfectly calibrated to the person's weight. Too short, and death would come slowly from strangulation. Too long, and the force could cause decapitation. In the days leading up to the execution, Pierrepoint made his preparations. 13 prisoners from the Belsen trial were sentenced to hang that day. The executions were scheduled to occur at roughly half-hour intervals. The three women, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Irma Gräser, and Juana Bormann, were to be executed first, individually. The gallows, built inside a prison workshop, were tested with sandbags to ensure the mechanism was flawless. On the morning of December 13th, the prison was tense. The execution schedule was followed to the minute. Official records confirm that Elisabeth Volkenrath was the first to be led from her cell. At 9:34 a.m., she was escorted to the execution chamber. Reports from those present noted her composure. She walked steadily, her face a mask of calm. Inside the execution room, the process was swift. Volkenrath was positioned on a chalk mark on the trapdoor. Pierrepoint's assistant secured her legs while Pierrepoint placed a white hood over her head and fitted the noose around her neck, positioning the knot just under her left ear. He then stepped back, took hold of the large wooden lever, and pulled. Elisabeth Volkenrath dropped in an instant. The rope went taut, and the force of the long drop did its work exactly as calculated. Her neck was broken instantly. A few minutes later, a doctor officially certified her death. The gallows were then prepared for the next prisoner, Irma Gräser, who followed at 10:03 a.m. The precise methodical process continued until all 13 were executed. The bodies, including Volkenrath's, were buried in the prison yard and later moved to an unmarked grave in a nearby cemetery. The story of the hairdresser who became a mass murderer had reached its final, unceremonious end. The case of Elisabeth Volkenrath is a chilling look at the human capacity for evil. It forces us to ask a question we still struggle with. How does an ordinary person become a monster? There's no simple answer. It was a descent that began with a choice to join a system built on hatred and was accelerated by indoctrination, ambition, and the intoxicating allure of absolute power. In the universe of the concentration camp, where all moral lines were erased, she discovered a profound cruelty within herself and chose to let it flourish.